Singapore will double down on diversifying supply chains and strengthening resilience to better respond to future pandemics. This is part of a review of the country's response to COVID-19, that battle released in a white paper last week.
Well, to tell us more, we have with us in studio the Permanent Secretary of the Trade and Industry Ministry, Gabriel Lim. Mr. Lim, welcome.
Thank you.
It's good to see you. So during COVID-19, we had a lot of conversations about supply chain resilience. This was listed as one of the wins in the COVID white paper in Singapore's response, and specifically that we managed to get critical supplies coming in, as well as we were able to export at that time. How can we do better than that?
Oh, I think there are always ways to get better. But I think that as we reflect on what worked well for us over the last few years, I think there were 3 points which we count ourselves very fortunate to have. I think the first was that, the credit very much goes to our predecessors, that we have an excellent infrastructure, an excellent connectivity, a world-class maritime port, a world-class airport, a tremendous connectivity to the rest of the world. And that put us in good stead to be able to weather some of the localized supply chain disruptions that were taking place in other countries, and in order to also fulfill our responsibility to the rest of the world as a global hub. The second thing was the element of trust. I think we took that very seriously, and what I mean by that was that at no point in time did we ever impose any sort of export restriction on any sort of essential goods. I think we're one of very few countries in the world that did that. We honored our commitments to our investors as well as to our international customers. And I think what that allowed us to do was to be able to service the rest of the world and to be able also to plug a hole when supply chains were being disrupted globally around the world. Yeah. And that's why PSA was able to position itself as a catch-up port, where all the delays that shippers were experiencing from other ports elsewhere were able to be mitigated and shortened when they came through Singapore to their final destination. So I think for us to do better, I would say we should double down on these 2 elements. We should continue to stay connected, continue to reach out and build a much richer, denser web of interlocking trade routes and trade connections. But at the same time also, always strengthen the trust we have with the business community, with our international partners, and of course, with our friends all around the world.
All right, Mr. Lim, I remember early on in the pandemic, you remember there's a rush for rice, and then we had a minister come out to say,
yes,
essentially, don't be so foolish about this. If you go rushing out to buy or stockpile, you will drive up prices when there's absolutely no need for that. And we have enough stockpiles as well. Yeah. But as you say, all things, even done well, can be done better. So a review of our stockpiling strategies, that's also being carried out. Tell us more about that.
Sure. I would just say first and foremost, since you mentioned the point from the former minister, I think that was Minister Chan Chun Sing, I just want to give a big, a word of thanks to all of our fellow Singaporeans for really being responsible with their buying, with their purchasing, and really making sure that they weren't hoarding too much and leaving enough for everybody to share. I think that was quite critical. The fact that we had such a high level of cooperation and cohesion really helped us weather the worst of these supply chain disruptions. But going forward, I would say we've never looked at stockpiling as the panacea or the single answer to this. There are really part of 3-pronged strategy. There is one, diversification, obviously. We want to buy, we want to trade, we want to work with a wide range of partners all around the world. That's a huge reason why we're so active on the international trade circuit. We sign FTAs. Our companies buy, purchase, sell, trade with a huge range of partners around the world. And that diversification is a very key part of helping us to mitigate any disruptions of local supply chains anywhere for any item. Second thing is, I think the pandemic also taught us that it is helpful to have some local production. Because when you have local production, you are able to basically produce goods, food. We don't have rice, but we did have local companies producing noodles, for example, bread, in order to cover for some of the import restrictions or the gaps in supply chains that arose during that time and which will arise in future. But of course, at the end of the day, I think the stockpiles remain our measure of last resort. It helps to have items physically in stock. We've done it with rice for the longest of times. And I think going forward, we will take a careful look as to what other items we need to stockpile for. It may not be just food. I think we should have to do more for essential medical supplies, like masks, for example, and maybe other goods or other items that are needed in our healthcare institutions, for example.
Toilet paper.
I'm not sure about toilet paper.
Do you think that in the case of medical supplies, the stockpiling of that, I mean, every pandemic is going to be different.
Yes.
How do you prepare ahead for the uncertainties of what might come with a future pandemic?
Well, I think the first thing we have to recognize is just to recognize that we can't prepare 100% for every last eventuality. I think it's not like possible, it's also too expensive, and you can't stockpile everything, you just don't have enough space. So you have to have just that understanding. I think it's important to prioritize the areas that you need and to make sure that we have enough as a baseline to get through that as a critical and essential service, come what may. And then I think the rest is really finding ways. I think diversifying your sources helps a lot because you can buy, purchase, or pool from different trading partners, but also the agility and I would say the social resilience to sort of tide over some unexpected surprises.
Yeah.
And just weather the storm, knuckle down, basically just endure the inconvenience for a short while until such point in time where the market normalizes and the goods are available again.
It's always worth contemplating the various challenges of the worst case scenario as well in planning too.
Well, as they say, only the paranoid survive.
That's a good one. Mr. Lim, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Gabriel Lim,
Good
the
evening.
Permanent Secretary of the Trade and Industry Ministry.